If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The wind pushed across the open land in long, steady bursts as Elias Ward rode toward the abandoned line shack. His horse moved slowly, forced by the injured weight of the man on its back. Elias kept his left hand firm on the reins while his right arm hung stiff against his ribs. The rifle round that tore through his shoulder had gone in clean, but carried dirt and cloth deep into the wound. By the time he reached the small structure, the pain had climbed into his neck and the fever blurred his sight. Elias dismounted with difficulty, gripping the saddle to steady himself. He had spent the last 5 years drifting from job to job. Fence work, scouting, escorting wagon trains when he could tolerate people for long enough. He had no permanent home, no real ties, and no interest in making any. Work kept him alive. Silence kept him steady. He avoided fights because he had seen too many escalate into pointless blood. But on the trail that morning, a group of raiders ambushed him without warning. He managed to escape, but not before a bullet tore into him and forced him into a fight he didn't want. As he pressed a hand to his shoulder and pushed the shack door open, he expected dust, broken wood, and quiet. Instead, he saw a young Apache woman crouched near the back wall, a knife in her hand and fear sharp in her eyes. Ahina had been hiding there for 2 days. The raiders who killed her husband and burned her camp had scattered, but she knew they were still tracking survivors. She chose the shack because it stood alone, far from trails. When the door opened, she braced herself to fight. The stranger's sudden collapse startled her, but the dark blood on his shirt and the pallor of his face told her he wasn't a threat in that moment. Elias tried to speak, but the fever took his breath. He steadied himself on his knees, struggling to keep his eyes open. His mind was alert enough to realize he had frightened her. He raised his left hand slowly, showing he held no weapon. He had lost his rifle during the escape, and his revolver was still holstered, impossible to reach with his damaged arm. Ahina watched him with caution. She had already lost everything: family, shelter, safety. Helping someone could expose her again, but leaving him to die felt like a decision she would carry forever. She studied his face, a man around 30, dust-covered, bruised, exhausted, but not violent. The tension in her chest eased slightly. "Sit," she said quietly, pointing to a spot near the wall. Elias obeyed, not out of trust, but because his legs weakened beneath him. He leaned back, breathing through the pain. He wondered if he had made a mistake choosing the shack. If she left or ran, he would not be able to move for hours. He felt the fever building and knew he needed help, even if he'd never been good at accepting it. Ahina approached him slowly, keeping her knife visible but not raised. When she saw the wound, she inhaled sharply. Infection had already begun. Red, swollen skin, and a smell that warned of danger. She understood the seriousness. Her tribe used a tonic for fevers and shock, a mix she carried in a small pouch because it had saved lives during raids and winters. "You drink," she said. Elias hesitated. Taking anything from a stranger felt risky, but refusing meant dying. He forced a nod. She held the cup to his lips, and he swallowed. The tonic burned, sending heat through his stomach and into his chest. He coughed, eyes watering, and she steadied his good shoulder with her hand. Her touch surprised him. It was careful and steady, not fearful. As the night deepened, Ahina cleaned the wound with cloth soaked in warm water. She pressed gently, watching his reaction. Elias clenched his jaw, but didn't push her away. He had been treated by doctors and ranch hands before, but no one had ever handled him with the level of attention she gave, focused, steady, and determined to keep him conscious. While she worked, she asked few questions. He answered with short, controlled sentences. "Why did they shoot you?" "Ambush." "Wrong place," he muttered. "Didn't start it." She believed him. There was nothing aggressive in his manner, nothing reckless in his movements. His silence held weight, not threat. Ahina offered him more tonic. He took it reluctantly, but he felt the fever loosen its grip little by little. His senses sharpened. The room became clearer. Her expression, firm yet tired, came into focus. She looked young, no more than 20, but her eyes carried days of grief. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice low. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Lost my family. Hiding. They look for me." Elias felt a dull ache in his chest, separate from his injury. He wanted to say something comforting, but didn't know how. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry." The words sounded plain, but she understood he meant them. As dawn approached, Elias drifted in and out of sleep, fighting to remain aware. Ahina sat near the door with her knife in her hand, listening for footsteps outside. She had not chosen this man, but now she felt responsible for keeping him alive until he could stand on his own. Elias realized something as he watched her from half-lidded eyes. She had every reason to run, yet she stayed. Her presence pulled him out of the fear that he would die alone on a cold floor. His mission had been simple: avoid trouble, survive the trail, reach the border town for work. Instead, he had found a woman fighting her own battle, cornered by violence he understood too well. Somewhere in his fevered thoughts, he made a quiet decision. If he walked away from this shack alive, he would not abandon her to face her enemies alone. Ahina didn't know his intention yet, but she saw the resolve in his gaze after the fever broke. The chapter closes with both characters exhausted, wary, and unsure of the next hours, yet tied together by necessity, circumstance, and the first fragile threads of trust. The first light of morning filtered through the cracked boards of the shack, touching the room with a pale, cold glow. Elias opened his eyes to the dull ache in his shoulder and the stiffness crawling down his back. His fever had broken, but the wound still pulsed with heat. For the first time since the ambush, his thoughts were clear enough to assess his chances of moving, fighting, or even standing without falling. The improvement was sharp and unexpected, but he accepted it without questioning the mixture that caused it. Ahina sat near the door, her knife resting across her knees. She had not slept long. Her eyes were alert, scanning the horizon through the narrow gap between the boards. The tension in her posture told Elias what he needed to know. The land outside was not safe yet, and she expected trouble. He slowly pushed himself up against the wall. His breath steadied. His senses felt sharper than they should have been after losing so much blood. The tonic's effect unsettled him, but he welcomed the clarity. Ahina moved closer and checked the bandage. Her hands were steady, and she watched his face carefully to gauge whether the pain had worsened. The torn skin looked cleaner, and the swelling had lessened slightly. She gave a quiet nod, relieved that her work through the night had not failed. Elias studied her more closely than he had been able to the night before. Her clothing torn at the edges, her hands marked with soot and dirt from fleeing her ruined camp, and her expression carrying the weight of someone who had been forced into survival without pause. He wanted to ask where she planned to go next, but before he spoke, she said, "We must leave soon." They searched this area. Her voice was calm, but the tension underneath was clear. Elias shifted his weight and tested the movement in his arm. Pain shot up his neck, but his grip was steady. "How many?" he asked. "4, maybe 5. Leader has a scar on his cheek." She paused, thinking through the details. "They do not quit." Her answer filled in the gap he had wondered about during the night. Why someone would burn a camp, chase a widow, and risk being caught by patrols. These men weren't after supplies. They wanted to eliminate witnesses. The thought pulled Elias fully awake. He had encountered their kind before. Men who believed no one would follow them into unclaimed land. Men who silenced survivors to avoid retribution. Ahina gathered her things, a small pouch, the tonic, a blanket rolled tightly. While she worked, Elias forced himself to stand. The room tilted for a moment, then steadied. The lining of the shack creaked as he leaned against it. His body felt lighter than expected, stronger than his wound should have allowed. He didn't understand it, but there was no time to question why. Ahina looked at him, worry tightening her brow. "You should rest longer. If we wait, they find us," he said. His voice was steady, showing no hesitation. He checked the revolver holster at his side. It was still loaded, still clean. It would have to be enough. Ahina stepped outside first, scanning the empty land. The ground showed faint tracks from the night before, but nothing fresh. Elias followed slowly, aware of every shift in his shoulder. The morning air carried a dry chill, clearing his lungs and sharpening his senses further. The land stretched wide and open, giving them little cover, but it also gave advance warning of anyone approaching. As they walked toward the horses, Elias noticed something he had missed the night before. Ahina's mare had a small gash on its flank. It wasn't deep, but it showed she had escaped her attackers by only seconds. He moved closer and inspected it. It almost got you, he said quietly. She nodded once. I ran when they were distracted. They killed the ones who fought. I did not have a weapon. She closed her hand over the mare's reins. I hid here because no one comes to this place. Elias understood now why she chose the shack, why she stayed even when he appeared at the door half dead. It wasn't trust, it was necessity, the same force that had driven him toward the shack when his vision narrowed and his pulse weakened. Two strangers pushed into the same corner by violence neither had asked for. Before mounting, Elias stopped. Something in the air had shifted. A faint tremor of hoofbeats vibrated through the ground, too distant for sight, but undeniable. Ahina felt it too. Her gaze hardened. They found us, she said. Elias drew his revolver and moved in front of her. His shoulder burned, but the rest of his body felt unervingly controlled. The morning light sharpened every sound, the rustle of dry grass, the distant clatter of metal, the breath of their horses. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, then 2 more behind them. The scarred man rode at the front. He spotted the pair instantly and signaled for the others to spread. Elias assessed their distance, their weapons, and the time before they closed in. His heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from a focus he had never felt this sharply. Ahina gripped her knife, ready but aware she could not outrun mounted men. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between her and the riders. The decision came without hesitation. He did not owe these men anything, and he would not let them take someone who had saved his life while her own was falling apart. As the riders charged downhill, dust rising behind them, Elias lifted the revolver with a steady hand. His injured shoulder protested, but his aim remained exact. The first shot cracked through the open land, striking the lead rider cleanly. The others hesitated, surprised by the speed and accuracy of a man who should barely be standing. Elias fired again, shifting to the next target before the echo faded. The fight lasted seconds, not minutes. When the last man fell from his saddle, the land grew silent again. Elias lowered his revolver, but did not relax until he scanned the ridge twice more. Ahina stepped beside him, her breathing unsteady. She looked at the fallen men, then at Elias. His face was expressionless, but his eyes carried a mixture of relief, strain, and something else, an understanding of the line he had crossed. He didn't kill because he enjoyed it. He killed because leaving these men alive meant condemning her. She approached the nearest body and took back a piece of jewelry he had taken from her, an earring, dented but still hers. Elias watched her quietly, understanding without asking. They mounted the horses and rode away from the shack without looking back. The land ahead was wide, difficult, and uncertain, yet neither suggested parting. The events of the morning removed the question entirely. From this point on, their survival depended on moving together. Their pace remained steady as they crossed a stretch of dry grassland. Ahina broke the silence first. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Haven't decided," he said honestly. Then, after a moment, "But I'll see you somewhere safe." Ahina absorbed his words with a quiet nod. For the first time since losing her family, she felt the ground beneath her feet shift towards something other than fear. They continued riding, heading toward distant land where the horizon opened wide, but their uncertainties narrowed. A new direction formed, not planned, not spoken, but clear enough for both to follow. The land opened into a long stretch of flat plain bordered by low, uneven hills. Elias and Ahina kept their pace steady, their horses carrying them farther from the line shack and the bodies left behind. Neither spoke for a while. The air carried the scent of dry earth, and the sun climbed without interruption. Elias used the silence to measure his strength. The wound throbbed, but the fever had not returned. The clarity in his mind remained unsettling yet useful. Every sound, every shift in the wind, every movement of Ahina's horse reached him with sharp detail, as if his senses had been forced into constant readiness. Ahina rode slightly behind him, watching the broad horizon with the focus of someone who had lived too long in danger. The attack near the shack had changed something in her expression. She no longer looked like someone bracing for death. She looked like someone preparing for the next step of survival. Elias understood that if she was ever to rebuild her life, she needed a place where the raiders' allies wouldn't find her. He considered the map in his memory: old ranch lands, abandoned settlements, small Apache homesteads that tried to remain unnoticed by the outside world. One of them lay several days' ride north, a place where he had once traded for food and rest. The people there were guarded but fair. If they still lived on that land, they might take her in. Ahina broke the silence. Those men, were they after you or me? Both, Elias answered. They shot first. Didn't expect me to get away. When they found your trail, they chose the easier target to chase. He kept his gaze forward. Once they saw us together, they decided neither of us should walk away. She absorbed the explanation with a slow nod. It answered the question she had carried quietly since the attack: how strangers could cross paths under the same threat. Elias noticed the tension ease from her shoulders. Shared danger created its own clarity. By midday, they stopped at a shallow creek bed. The water moved thinly over pale stones. Elias knelt carefully and washed his hands, then splashed water on his face. Ahina checked the horses, then knelt beside him and lifted his arms slightly to inspect the bandage. The cloth had soaked through. She unwrapped it with careful fingers. The wound looked cleaner than earlier, though the edges remained swollen. Elias watched her steady movements, impressed by how she handled each task with precision despite her exhaustion. You did this for many people? He asked. She hesitated. My mother taught us. We cared for each other in the camp. She dipped a cloth into the creek. I was not the best, but I learned enough. You kept me alive. His tone was straightforward, not flattering, but it made her pause. She pressed the damp cloth to his shoulder and saw the way his jaw tightened. She did not pull back. You were half conscious, she said. Many men die from wounds like this. Elias met her eyes. I'm not most men. She didn't smile, but something softened in her expression, an acknowledgement that strength could appear quietly, not through loud declarations but through endurance. After tending his wound, Ahina filled a small leather pouch with water. They ate a small meal, dried meat for him, berries she had gathered earlier for herself. Elias noticed she took less than she needed, leaving more for their journey. It wasn't a habit of generosity. It was a habit of someone who had lived with scarcity for too long. They mounted again and continued north. The land grew harsher. Rocky stretches, scattered brush, and abandoned fire pits left by travelers who moved through quickly. Ahina leaned close enough to speak without raising her voice. Where are we going? There's a homestead ahead. Apache. Not your people, but they might take you in. They're good people. Keep to themselves. She considered his answer. And you? I'll see that you reach them, he said. After that, I'll figure out my direction. It was the first time he spoke about what came next for him, though he wasn't certain of it. Drifting had been his life for years. But the thought of leaving her at the homestead brought a dull, unexpected discomfort. He didn't dwell on it. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the ground. They stopped again so Elias could rest briefly. As they settled beside a group of boulders, Ahina broke a branch into small pieces, feeding a small flame she built within a rock hollow. Elias sat beside her, leaning back with a slow exhale. The warmth soothed the stiffness in his muscles. Ahina looked at him with a searching expression, as if trying to piece together the quiet man who had stepped into danger for her without hesitation. You said you worked jobs. Why were you on that trail? Town north of here needed riders to deliver supplies, he said. I was heading there for work. Simple route, until I crossed paths with the wrong man. He paused. I don't look for trouble, but trouble finds people like me anyway. What kind of people? She asked. Men who walk alone. Men who don't have anyone waiting. His words carried more truth than he intended to reveal. Ahina listened without judgment. She understood solitude. She understood the weight of traveling without a place to return to. As evening approached, they prepared to ride again. The air cooled quickly, and the sky shifted from pale blue to a deeper, calmer tone. Before Elias mounted, Ahina handed him her canteen. "Drink," she said. "You need strength." He accepted it. The gesture, simple as it was, marked another small shift between them. Actions replacing words, trust forming through necessity and quiet observation. They continued riding until the land ahead formed the first gentle rise toward the north. Elias recognized the direction. "Another day," he said. "Maybe less if the horses hold." Ahina nodded. She hadn't expected a place of safety this soon, and though she did not say it, relief moved through her shoulders. She had spent days thinking she would die alone. Now she allowed herself to imagine stopping somewhere that wasn't burning or broken. As darkness settled, they found shelter beneath an overhanging rock formation. They tethered the horses, arranged their blankets, and prepared to rest. Elias kept his revolver within reach. Ahina lay a short distance away, close enough to hear if he shifted or woke suddenly. Before sleep took her, she spoke into the quiet. "You could have left me at the shack. I wasn't going to do that." "Why?" Elias considered the answer, choosing it carefully. "Because you didn't run when you could have, and because you deserve a chance to live. That's enough for me." Ahina absorbed his words, and a quiet understanding settled between them. Two strangers carrying heavy losses, moving through a land that forced them to depend on one another not by choice but by truth. They fell asleep under the wide night sky, the horses standing guard in the silence, the cold wind moving softly across the land. Their path was still long, but the beginnings of something steady, trust, responsibility, and a fragile sense of belonging, had taken root, guiding them toward whatever waited ahead. The morning cold settled deep into the rocks above them, nudging Elias awake before the sun rose. He moved slowly, testing the strength in his shoulder. The pain was there, steady but manageable, far less crippling than it had been days before. Ahina stirred shortly after, brushing dust from her clothing and securing the blanket she had folded with practiced care. Her movements were quiet but purposeful, the habits of someone who had survived by being alert before daylight. They saddled the horses and continued north. The land grew uneven, dipping into narrow gullies and rising into ridges that cut the horizon into sharp lines. Elias scanned the terrain carefully. The raiders were gone, but danger traveled differently in this part of the country. Strangers looking for opportunity, patrols who questioned Apache travelers without hesitation, and the unforgiving land itself. Ahina rode close, reading the ground as well as he did. She pointed out tracks he had missed, deer 2 days old, a set of wagon ruts far to the east, and a faint trail from a lone rider moving south. Her quiet guidance filled gaps Elias hadn't addressed earlier, showing how she navigated land that had been her home since childhood. Around midday, they crested a ridge, and the valley below opened wide. A faint plume of smoke rose from a cluster of buildings nestled near a stand of cottonwoods. Ahina eased her reins. "Is that the place?" she asked. Elias nodded. "They keep to themselves. They'll let you rest. Maybe stay." He watched her expression closely. The uncertainty in her eyes was not fear, but a cautious hope. She had lost everything familiar, and this land carried reminders of all that had been taken from her. Reaching a safe homestead was more than shelter. It was a chance to breathe without looking over her shoulder. Before descending toward the valley, Elias inspected the area for signs of recent trouble. The land was quiet. No tracks suggested anyone had passed through violently. Still, he kept his hand near his revolver. Ahina followed his gaze and sensed his concern. "You think someone waits there?" she asked. "No," he answered, "but I want to be sure you walk in safe." It was an honest response, and she understood the weight behind it. After everything they had faced, neither of them could afford assumptions. They rode into the valley slowly. As the buildings grew clearer, An older Apache man stepped from the porch of the main house, watching them approach with guarded eyes. A woman joined him, broad-shouldered, calm, holding a small bundle of firewood. Elias raised a hand in greeting. The man did not wave back, but did not reach for a weapon either. Ahina dismounted first, standing straight despite her exhaustion. The woman looked at the torn edges of her clothing, the worn state of her boots, and the bruises that had faded into the skin around her neck. Understanding passed between them without explanation. The couple stepped aside, allowing her to enter the homestead yard. The man turned to Elias. "You injured," he said plainly. "Bullet." She treated it. Elias kept his tone respectful. The man examined the bandage, the dried blood, and the sharpness in Elias's eyes that didn't match the weakness expected from such a wound. "You plan to stay?" the man asked. Elias hesitated. He glanced toward Ahina, who was now speaking quietly with the woman, her voice steady yet subdued. "Not sure," he said. "My plan was to get her somewhere safe." The man studied him a moment longer, then stepped back. "You help her. You rest here if you need. No trouble." Elias followed Ahina into the yard. The woman guided her to a bench and brought water, bread, and a blanket. Ahina accepted with quiet gratitude, keeping Elias within her field of vision as if she wasn't ready to be separated completely. Elias sat nearby, adjusting the bandage on his shoulder while the older man observed with a mechanic's sigh. After a moment, the man brought out clean cloth and a jar of salve. "Use this," he said. "We'll keep the wound from worsening." Elias accepted, surprised by the gesture. He had spent years drifting through towns where trust was rare and kindness came with a cost. Here it felt simple, direct, and honest. Ahina finished eating and approached him. Her posture was straighter, her hands steadier. "You will stay a while," she said, not as a request, but as an observation. "I'll stay long enough to make sure you're settled," Elias replied. "After that, I should move on. I've never stayed anywhere long." Saying it out loud made the words feel heavier. Something in him resisted the thought of leaving. Ahina looked down at her repaired jewelry, the piece she had taken back from the raider, now hanging loosely from her hand. "You came back for me," she said quietly. "You protected me when no one else would. You don't have to leave yet." Elias didn't answer immediately. He had lived most of his adult life with a single rule: keep moving, keep distance, avoid attachments that end badly. Yet over the past days, the presence of someone who cared whether he lived or died had unsettled that rule. He watched her now, standing in the soft valley light, fragile and strong at once, and felt the unfamiliar pull of wanting to stay. The older woman approached Ahina and touched her arm gently. "You can help us here," she said. "There is work. There is room." Ahina nodded slowly. She understood the offer. She also understood that her decision was only half of what needed to be made. Elias rose, ignoring the throb in his shoulder. "I'll help with the fence," he said, gesturing toward the weathered posts that lined the property. The man nodded in approval and handed him a tool. Physical labor grounded Elias, gave him time to think without having to speak. Ahina watched him walk toward the fence, her expression unreadable. The rest of the day unfolded quietly. Elias worked beside the older man, repairing the fence and carrying cut lumber. Ahina helped the woman sort supplies, clean the small garden area, and tend to the animals. During these tasks, the questions that had lingered since the start of the journey found answers without breaking the natural rhythm of the story. Ahina learned the couple knew nothing of the attack on her camp, but understood the pattern of violence in the region. They promised no one would speak her name to outsiders. Elias learned they occasionally hosted travelers, but rarely anyone wounded or in danger. They agreed to let him rest as long as necessary. As evening settled, Ahina and Elias sat a short distance apart, the fire casting a steady glow on their faces. She broke the quiet first. "You could leave tomorrow, but you haven't decided," she said. "No, I haven't." "Then stay until you know." Her words were simple, but held meaning he could not ignore. Elias looked at the fire, then at her. The ache in his shoulder pulsed, proof of the hardship they had shared. The air was cool, quiet, and free of chasing footsteps. For the first time in years, he felt something close to rest. Ahina shifted closer, not touching him, just letting her presence settle beside his. It was enough. They remained by the fire until the flames lowered and the valley grew silent, both aware that the next day would bring a decision, one that would determine whether their paths parted or finally found a place to settle. Dawn rose quietly across the valley, washing the homestead in pale gold. Elias woke before anyone else, out of habit more than need. The night had been calm, the kind of stillness he rarely trusted. He sat up slowly, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle into his chest. His shoulder ached, but the wound no longer felt dangerous. The swelling had begun to fade, and the salve the older man provided had eased the worst of the stiffness. He could ride again. He could travel. Nothing tied him to this place except the one thing he had never expected to find on the trail, a reason to stay. Ahina stepped outside the small room she shared with the older woman. She carried a bowl of water and a piece of cloth, prepared to check his shoulder as she had done each day. But when she saw him awake and already dressed, she paused. His horse stood saddled near the fence, reins loose over the post. Her breath tightened, not because she feared being abandoned, but because she understood how easily people drifted away when the road called them. "You're leaving," she said. Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked at his horse, then at her. "I thought I should," he said quietly. "This place is safe. You have people here. You don't need me causing trouble or drawing attention." Ahina walked closer. Her expression held no anger, only sadness layered with understanding. "You think you bring trouble," she said, "but you gave me safety. You gave me a chance to live past that night." Elias lowered his gaze. "You're stronger than you think. You would have survived without me." She shook her head. "I would have died alone, if not at the shack, then on the trail. I know that. And you know that." Her voice remained steady. "I do not want to build a life alone again. Not if I have a choice." Elias felt the words settle heavily. Every instinct told him he should walk away before he grew attached. Attachment had cost him before. Friends buried, jobs that ended in violence, places burned to the ground. But this was different. Ahina was not asking for promises. She wasn't asking him to become someone else. She was offering something he never allowed himself to consider, a place where he would not be a stranger. The older man approached, carrying a small bag of dried herbs. "For your shoulder," he said. "Take it if you ride out." Elias accepted the bag, but didn't tie it to his saddle. The man studied him briefly, then glanced toward Ahina. "You help each other. That is good." His tone held no pressure, only acknowledgement. "You stay if you want. Work here if you need purpose." The offer struck Elias harder than expected. Purpose. It had been years since anyone spoke to him like a man who could contribute rather than disappear. He looked at the horse again. Leaving meant returning to empty trails, empty campsites, empty conversations. Staying meant sharing meals, fixing fences, watching the seasons change from the same doorstep. It meant waking up to someone who looked at him without fear or judgment. Ahina stepped closer. She didn't touch him, but her presence filled the space between them with quiet certainty. "If you go," she said softly, "the world will take you far from this place. But if you stay, you will not walk alone anymore." For a long moment, Elias stood completely still. Then he reached up, untied the reins from the post, and removed the saddle from his horse. He carried it back toward the shed where it had been stored before. Each step felt like a decision settling firmly into place. Ahina watched him, her shoulders easing as she understood the choice without needing him to speak it. The older couple exchanged a small, knowing glance and returned to their morning tasks. When Elias came back to her, he exhaled slowly. "I'll stay," he said, "if you want me here." "I do," she replied. "Not because you saved me, but because you stayed when you didn't have to." The simplicity of her answer grounded him more than anything else had. They spent the day working side by side. Elias repaired the corral fencing, guided by the older man's instructions. Ahina tended the small garden, fed the animals, and learned the rhythm of a place untouched by the violence she had escaped. Throughout the day, they crossed paths often, short glances, shared water, small nods that carried more weight than spoken words. In the evening, they sat outside near the fire. The valley stretched quietly below them, the air cool and still. Elias rested his hand lightly on his bandaged shoulder. Ahina sat beside him, her knees pulled close, her expression calm for the first time since he had met her. "You found what you were looking for?" she asked. "I wasn't looking for anything," Elias said, "but I found something anyway." She accepted his words with a faint, steady smile. "Then this is a good place to begin again." For Elias, beginning again was not a dramatic declaration. It was the act of staying, of choosing a life that didn't rely on drifting. For Ahina, beginning again meant rebuilding with someone who respected her strength and carried no expectations beyond honesty and presence. As the fires settled into steady embers, the sound of horses grazing in the distance and the soft breath of the valley wrapped around them. There were no threats on the horizon, no shadows tracking them, no unanswered questions pulling them apart. Elias rested his hand near hers. Ahina didn't move away. They remained by the fire until the stars filled the sky, sharing the quiet as two people who had survived separate tragedies yet reached the same place, alive, steady, and ready to build a future without fear. The next morning would bring work, routine, and the slow forming of a new life. But for now, the ending was simple and certain. They stayed, and together they began again.